In his ignorant, arrogant, and political illiterate articulations, Jacob Zuma says he does not know why he had to leave the office of president, because those who engaged with him about his resignation are afraid and actually very scared of him. And we wish to take this opportunity to remind him of his many sins. But because there are many, we'll just say the few. It was Jacob Zuma's presidency that 34 mine workers were massacred by the ANC government in Marikana. And this, of course, happened in collaboration with and due to the pressure of the current president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa. It was under Jacob Zuma that the corruption committed under the arms deal was swept under the carpet and suppressed through a fast commission of inquiry which ignored critical evidence of wrongdoing by people who to this day still enjoy the proceeds of the arms deal corruption. It was under Jacob Zuma that all strategic state-owned companies such as Eskom, Dinel, Transnet, SAA, SA Express, Safcol, CEF, Petro SA, and Prasa were auctioned off to a criminal syndicate network led by the Guptas, which laundered billions of rands out of South Africa and caused massive debts in the state-owned companies. It was under Jacob Zuma's presidency that the South African government spent more than 250 million building and renovating private residence through an immensely corrupt procurement process. Jacob Zuma is the only head of state who was found to have violated the Constitution, and he failed to uphold, defend, and respect the Constitution. Violation of the Constitution is not a minor issue and should on its own constitute a legitimate reason for resignation as president and head of state. It was under Jacob Zuma that the strategic fuel reserves were illegally sold because certain individuals were paid bribes, to the extent that South Africa currently do not have strategic fuel reserves needed in case of emergency. It was under Jacob Zuma's administration that the criminal justice system, particularly the National Prosecuting Authority, the Hawks, the South African Police Services, Special Investigation Unit, were incapacitated to deal with sophisticated crimes. It was under the leadership of Jacob Zuma that the South African Revenue Services, SARS, was incapacitated and now cannot honestly collect revenue. It was under Jacob Zuma that the state dismally failed to deal with illicit financial flows, tax avoidance, and money laundering because Zuma's friends were busy shifting billions of rands out of South Africa. It was under Jacob Zuma that the Office of Public Protector was almost extinguished with recurrent insult, deliberate incapacitation, and non-cooperation from the executive, whose obligations included provision of full support to the Office of the Public Protector. It was under Jacob Zuma that white landowners continued to receive billions of rands of state money buying stolen land, which was never transferred to the rightful owners. Zuma cannot claim anything about land redistribution because he was too busy stealing and not focusing on important question of reclaiming the land. It was under the presidency of Jacob Zuma that South African Defence Force soldiers were deployed to fight illegal wars in the Central African Republic, and 14 of them losing their lives in a war that sought to protect Zuma's business interest. It was under Jacob Zuma's leadership that Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was surrendered to imperialist forces and got killed like a dog in events that resulted in regressive degeneration of Libya. It was under Jacob Zuma's leadership that Morocco rejoined the African Union despite its colonial occupation of Western Sahara to this day. It was under Jacob Zuma where theft of public resources became fashionable because institutions were weakened and no one could call anybody to order. It was under Jacob Zuma that the executive was unnecessarily ballooned and used as a means to dispense patronage and hand over government to incompetent and corrupt individuals. It was under Jacob Zuma that the state was forced to begin with procurement of unaffordable nuclear energy, which would have collapsed South Africa's budget. It was under Jacob Zuma that the corruptly awarded tenders to distribute social grants was declared legally and constitutionally invalid, and therefore threatening the stability of the country. SASSA is a crisis waiting to happen due to corrupt practices and bribes which Jacob Zuma is party to. It was under Jacob Zuma that public health care totally collapsed, signified with the Life as a Demanding massacre and many other public health institutions that have collapsed. It was under Jacob Zuma that the government debt grew by leaps and bounds to the extent that currently the state spends more than 200 billion annually servicing the debt. It was under Jacob Zuma that state-owned companies accumulated a lot of debt due to corruption, with Eskom currently owing more than 470 billion. It was under Jacob Zuma where the appointment of ministers and board members of key state-owned companies was shifted to the Gupta's-led criminal syndicate. It was under Jacob Zuma that the frequent cabinet reshuffles were conducted not with the purpose of improving government services to the people, but with the aim of perpetuating corruption and theft of public resources. It was under Jacob Zuma that the intelligence services were used for corrupt and narrow personal purposes, instead of being used as a means to protect South Africa from security genuine threats. It was under Jacob Zuma that the public broadcaster, the SABC, was significantly weakened and rendered dysfunctional through appointment of incompetent individuals into boards and management of the broadcaster. It was under Jacob Zuma that a relatively progressive minerals and petroleum resources development bill was not passed into law because Zuma was still protecting his own business interest, therefore causing massive uncertainty in the mineral sector. It was under Zuma that unemployment grew significantly and no real sustainable jobs were created. It was under Jacob Zuma that the economy stagnated and a huge number of South Africans live below poverty line. It was under Jacob Zuma and because of Jacob Zuma that Parliament was militarized, with police, the defense force, and violent bouncers deployed and employed to intimidate and suppress members of Parliament. Should I continue with more reasons? We must further dispel the claim that Zuma gave free education to the country. Free education was as a result of Fees Must Fall generation, which brought Zuma's government screaming and kicking to the table to concede on fee-free education. There are so many other reasons why resignation of Jacob Zuma is long overdue, and for him to claim ignorance of all this represents over-exaggerated sense of aloofness and self-seeking greed. Each and every one of these issues are reasons enough why Zuma's presidency was no longer bearable.